My name is Maria, and I'll be 26 next month. Sometimes I think that sounds much more grown up than I feel. For the past 4 years, I've lived with my parents, in the same house where I once drew on the walls with chalk and believed that adulthood began with being able to go to bed whenever I wanted. After college, I got a business degree, and frankly, I was sure everything would go according to plan. I'd find a job, rent an apartment, buy dishes that would be exclusively mine, and finally start living my life for real. Most of my friends are already living like that. Some rent a studio apartment, some split the costs with a roommate, but I'm still stuck at home. Sometimes I feel like I've been standing still while everyone else is racing ahead. It wasn't meant to be this way. After graduation, I got an offer from a marketing firm, my first real job. I was beaming with joy then, even sleeping with a smile, because I felt a new, different time was dawning. Melissa, my friend since college, and I were going door to door, looking at listings, and one of them, bright, with windows overlooking the park and a kitchen where I immediately imagined mornings with coffee, seemed perfect. Everything was falling into place, until that Sunday dinner. I remember that evening down to the last detail, the smell of fried chicken, the dim light over the table, and how, full of anticipation, I spooned mashed potatoes into my bowl and said, "Dad, Mom, I have great news." I smiled, not noticing the air in the room seemed thicker. I found an apartment, not far from the office. Can you imagine? It will be so much more convenient than commuting from the suburbs every day. Mom's fork paused in midair. Dad stopped chewing. They exchanged glances, and there was something in their gaze that I couldn't decipher. "Darling," Mom began, and by the way her voice wavered, I could already tell my news no longer sounded good. "We need to talk about something." Then everything seemed to blur, words, sounds, even the taste of food. Dad told me he'd injured his back on the construction site where he'd worked for 20 years, and now he was making only half his old salary. Their insurance barely covered anything, and the mortgage was a burden. "We hate to ask this," Dad said, looking down, "but maybe you could stay home for at least another year, help us with the bills a little, just until I go back to work." His voice was controlled, but I sensed the desperation lurking there. I didn't hesitate. Of course I'd stay. These are my parents, the ones who pulled me through all the difficult years, who believed when I doubted myself. 1 year, is that really too much? The first year, I simply helped out, buying groceries, occasionally paying the utilities. The second year was different. I took on all the bills, and then, almost without noticing, I was paying the mortgage. What was supposed to be temporary became a way of life. I told myself it was necessary, that things would soon get better, but somewhere deep down I knew that this year had long since ended, and I was still standing in the same place, as if tied to my childhood home. Vanessa, my older sister, came over almost every Saturday, confident, with perfectly coiffed hair, in dresses that looked like they'd come straight from a shop window. She lived downtown, worked as a lawyer, and loved to show off her life as a model for making good decisions. Over dinner, she always found a way to remind me that things were a little different for me. "So, sis, is there someone special?" she asked one day, smirking over her glass of wine. I simply shook my head. "Not now," I replied, trying not to look in her direction. "I understand," she drawled, feigning sympathy, "although it must be hard to meet someone when you're still living with Mom and Dad. Are you really bringing a guy into your childhood room?" She laughed, loudly and deliberately. Mom gently chided her. "Oh, Vanessa, stop teasing your sister," but the smile on her face betrayed that she was, in fact, amused. Dad chuckled into his plate. I sat silently, clutching my napkin, feeling a lump growing in my chest that I couldn't swallow. That evening, after the guests left, I closed the door to my room and sat in the dark for a long time. The moon illuminated the walls, where school photos still hung. Then I decided, this won't happen anymore. I'll start saving. Maybe it's just a little bit, maybe just crumbs from every paycheck, but they will be my crumbs, my way out. I opened a separate account and didn't tell anyone, not even my mother. I simply hid this little secret, like a seed of hope, quietly growing somewhere beneath the skin, biting its time. Most of my salary had long since ceased to be mine. It disappeared into a bottomless abyss of bills, taxes, insurance, and the constant unforeseen expenses that seemed to appear out of nowhere whenever I'd let out a sigh of relief. Almost every week, Mom would bring some new paperwork. Either the heating bill was higher than usual, or the insurance had gone up, or the house tax bill had arrived and needed to be paid right now. After his injury, Dad couldn't work as much as he used to, and he increasingly sat in the kitchen, looking through forms, pinching the bridge of his nose, as if hoping the numbers on the accounts would disappear if he stared at them long enough. I kept silent, because pity and anger were intertwined within me, and I didn't know which was louder. As my birthday approached, I caught myself wanting at least something of my own, something small, simple, unrelated to debts and bills, just an evening where you can laugh not because you have to maintain the atmosphere, but because you're genuinely happy. I imagined us all sitting at Riverside, a cozy restaurant on the riverbank, with soft lighting and a saxophone playing, and me, in my new dress, feeling like a woman with a life of her own, even if only for a few hours. At dinner, I gathered my courage and said, "You know, since it's my birthday next month, I was thinking maybe we could celebrate at Riverside? Just us, the family, I can even make a reservation." There was a moment of silence, and I knew something was wrong. That same look between Mom and Dad flashed like lightning again. Mom shook her head gently. "Oh, honey, we can't afford that right now. Restaurants are so expensive," I quickly added, "but I'll pay for it myself. It's my birthday, after all, and I just want something special this year." Dad cleared his throat, as if about to say something official, and said in a low, tired voice, "Maria, you know all your money goes to the house, we're counting on it." I felt something collapse inside me, like thin ice cracking under my feet. "But it's just one dinner," I began, but Mom was already speaking firmly, almost cheerfully. "We'll throw a wonderful celebration right here. We'll invite the family. I'll bake your favorite cake." I nodded, feeling my shoulders sag, and smiled, because what else could I do? Argue with them? That would seem ungrateful. In fact, I hadn't felt like a daughter for a long time now, more like an accountant, making sure everything added up. Every month, I spent almost my entire paycheck, and what was left went on the bare necessities: shampoo, new shoes, coffee on the way to work. Even these little things would elicit a wry smile from my mother. "Oh, did you buy something for yourself again?" She said it as if it were a joke, but there was a note of reproach in her voice, as if I was spending money that wasn't my own. They truly didn't know I had that secret account, my tiny island of freedom, where almost $8,000 had accumulated over 3 years, not millions, but enough to know that if everything ever collapsed, I'd have a chance to escape. When my birthday arrived, a cool April Saturday, smelling of rain and spring earth, I decided not to let disappointment ruin the day. I woke up early, though I was desperate for sleep, and immediately went to help my mother. "Maria, could you vacuum the living room and put out the folding chairs?" she asked, setting out plates of snacks. I nodded, though my insides sank. At some point, I realized I was planning my own birthday party, one I'd paid for myself: the food, the drinks, the decorations. It all came out of my pocket, and yet, I tried to smile, convincing myself it was just family warmth. Just a tradition. By noon, the house was sparkling clean, smelling of vanilla and baked goods, and I was standing in front of the mirror, putting on the dark blue dress I'd bought on sale last month. It fit perfectly, accentuating my waist, and for the first time in a long time, I felt beautiful. My mother, seeing it, shook her head. "It's a little tight, don't you think?" "It is a family occasion, after all." I remained silent, smiling back, but inside I felt another pang, as if someone had quietly deflated my spirits, like a balloon after a party. Just before 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I went to answer it, but Mom beat me to it. "Vanessa, you're early," she exclaimed, as joyfully as if a queen had arrived. My sister appeared in the doorway wearing a sparkly designer dress that I was sure cost more than anything in my closet. "I decided to help with the organization," she said, looking around the table and pretending to check something, although everything was already ready, down to the last detail. Mom clasped her hands. "How thoughtful, dear. Maria, look, your sister has come to help." I merely nodded and forced a smile, feeling a quiet weariness welling up inside me, not a physical one, but the kind that comes when you're once again made to understand that the holiday isn't yours, the house isn't yours, life isn't entirely yours either. Within an hour, the house was buzzing with voices, glasses clinking, someone laughing loudly, someone trying to shout over the music, and the air was filled with the smell of roasting meat, vanilla, and my Aunt Linda's perfume, which always reminded me of Christmas. I stood in the living room doorway, holding a plate, and watched as our house gradually transformed into a cramped, noisy nest where everyone knew their place, except me, Vanessa, as hostess of the ball, stood by the door and received the guests as if it weren't my birthday, but her own charity reception. "Welcome, so glad you could come," she said, coquettishly touching Uncle Dave's elbow as he stepped through the door. "Maria's probably around here somewhere," she added, waving her hand in my direction as if I were a serving staff member. When Cousin Jennifer approached me with a bright gift bag glittering with gold ribbons, I didn't even have time to thank her before Vanessa deftly reached over and snatched it away. "I'll put it with the others," she said without looking at me. And a second later the gift disappeared into the corner of the room where she'd been carefully arranging them like trophies. I bit my tongue. I knew if I said a word now, I'd ruin everything, and causing a scene at my own birthday party seemed too humiliating even for me. We sat at the long table I'd decorated that morning, a white tablecloth, cheap but pretty candles, sprigs of greenery. It all seemed almost festive, if you didn't think about the fact that it was all bought with my money. The food looked good, Mom had done a great job, though I knew I'd prepared half of it myself. Dad stood up first, raised his glass, and, clearing his throat, said, "To our youngest daughter, Maria, on her 26th birthday." He paused, smiled at everyone at the table, and continued, "We are so proud of the contribution she makes to our family." These words seemed like they should have warmed my heart, but when he added, "Maria helps us pay some bills while she lives at home," my stomach sank. Some bills? I nearly choked on my water. I was paying for everything: the house, the electricity, their medication, the taxes, the groceries, even the cake that now sat before us, but I remained silent. I merely clutched my glass a little tighter. Mom nodded, echoing, "Yes, Maria helps us a lot while she sorts out her career." I felt as if someone was slowly turning on a faucet inside me, releasing the last of the air. Sorting out her career? I'd been promoted twice in the last year and a half, I'd achieved success at my company, and I'd worked long hours to keep up with the team. The problem wasn't my career, it was that my entire salary was disappearing into this house. The toasts continued. Aunt Linda, sitting next to me, smiled her usual gentle smile and said, "You're such a hard-working girl, Maria. Someday you're sure to find your way and your place." Her husband, Uncle Steve, added, nodding, "Sooner or later you'll get there, baby." I nodded, feeling something break inside me. They all thought I lived at home because I couldn't afford to live any other way. They didn't know I was the reason this house hadn't been foreclosed on yet. They didn't know that I was the one saving them every month, and it seemed no one even thought to ask. And then Vanessa stood up, in her immaculate champagne-colored dress, with that same expression I'd known since childhood, slightly mocking, confident, and cool. She raised her glass and, smiling, said, "Well, my little sister, 26 years old, and still living with Mom and Dad." There was a hint of mockery in her voice, and then, before anyone could comprehend, she added, "Some of us fly the nest, and some never learn to fly." Laughter rolled across the table, polite, but very real. My cousins hid their smiles behind napkins, Uncle Steve chuckled, even Mom snickered, covering her mouth with her hand, and Dad shook his head as if it was all just a harmless joke. I sat motionless, feeling hot waves welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let the tears come. No, that's exactly what she wanted, to make me look weak. I raised my glass and, trying to keep my voice steady, said, "Thank you, sis, for such a warm toast. It's always nice to know where you stand in the family hierarchy." A brief silence fell over the table, someone chuckled awkwardly, and Vanessa shrugged, as if she didn't care. After that, the evening seemed to turn upside down. She was the center of attention. Again and again, she told stories about her latest court case, her new car, her upcoming vacation in Cancun, and everyone listened, laughed, and admired, as if it were her birthday. Meanwhile, I filled glasses, made sure everyone had food, and pretended everything was fine. By 9 o'clock, the guests began to leave. Aunt Linda came up to me, hugged me, and whispered, "Happy birthday, darling, don't worry. You'll definitely get back on your feet someday." I smiled, even though I knew I'd been standing there for a while. It was just that everyone around me had chosen not to notice. After the door closed behind them and the house sank back into a silence that seemed almost deafening after the bustle, I was left standing in the middle of the living room, looking at the table littered with dirty plates, glasses with lipstick stains stuck to them, and melted candles that I'd lit that morning with such care, as if whether anyone would truly believe I was happy depended on them. The air was thick with the smell of wine and roasting meat, and in this viscous silence, I suddenly Felt like a servant at my own party. Save the kitchen for tomorrow, Dad said, yawning. As he passed by, he didn't even glance at me, just patted me wearily on the shoulder. Mom and I are going to bed. I turned to him, not believing he was seriously planning to leave with all this disarray all around, and said, but the food will spoil. There's meat, salads, desserts. If I don't clean it up, it'll all be gone tomorrow. Mom, already climbing the stairs, replied over her shoulder, then just put it in the fridge, Maria. Good night, birthday girl. So I was left alone, cleaning up after my own birthday party, which I'd paid for myself. My parents were asleep, and Vanessa, of course, had left early. She'd promised to meet friends at the bar and vanished in her cloud of perfume, not even bothering to thank me. By the time I finished, the clock was almost midnight, the house was finally clean, the leftovers put away, the trash taken out, and I collapsed on the sofa. Feeling not fatigue but a thick emptiness settle in my chest, I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the greetings, many of them from people I barely remembered, and it all seemed so distant, unreal. And then I noticed my mom's phone on the coffee table. She must have left it behind when she cleared the table. I reached over to charge it, and at that moment a notification flashed on the screen, a message from Vanessa. Hey, Mom, how much are you sending this month? I froze. I hadn't meant to look. Really, but something inside me seemed to twitch. The thin thread that had kept me calm for years finally snapped. I swiped my finger across the screen, and the phone opened the conversation. I shouldn't have done this. I knew I was crossing a line, but years of humiliation, today's ridicule, and the feeling of living in a house where I was unseen made this decision inevitable. Scrolling through their messages, I couldn't comprehend what I was reading at first. Thanks for the money, Mom. The new furniture in the apartment looks amazing. Another, Dad said he could send an extra $500 since Maria paid for the car repairs. Then another, the one that really nailed it. Yeah, her birthday speech was hilarious. Poor, clueless Maria. My hands began to shake, line after line, word after word. Something built up that upended everything I believed. It turned out they weren't struggling financially at all. They were taking my money, my hard-earned, hard-won, penny-saving money, and giving it to Vanessa, laughing at me behind my back. I didn't sleep almost all night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, hearing Mom and Dad breathing evenly in the next room, and each breath felt like a betrayal. Every time I closed my eyes, those messages floated before me, like they were burned into the inside of my eyelids. When dawn broke, an icy vacuum replaced the anger. Everything was clear, and I knew I couldn't stay. I texted Melissa briefly, "Can I stay over for a couple of days?" "It's urgent." Her reply came almost immediately, "Sure, is everything okay?" "Not really, I'll explain when I see you, thanks." At breakfast, I told my parents I wasn't feeling well and would be taking the day off. Mom nodded, not looking up from her coffee, and Dad simply muttered, "Rest." As their car drove away, I stood by the window, watching it disappear around the corner, and in that moment, it became physically difficult to breathe, the realization that this was no longer my home. I called work, asked for 3 days off, and wasted no time in packing. When you live frugally, you find out you don't have much. 2 suitcases, all that could be called mine. I carefully packed my clothes, my laptop, a couple of my favorite books, important documents, and a small box of childhood treasures, drawings, postcards, a plastic horse my mother once called good luck. It sounded almost mocking now. Melissa arrived around 11. She walked in, seeing the suitcases by the door, and froze. "Wow, this isn't for a couple of days, girlfriend, what's going on?" I silently handed her the phone, showing her the photos of the messages. She read them, and her face changed. "Oh my God, Maria, such manipulators," she breathed. "I've been telling you for years that something is wrong with your relationship." I nodded, feeling empty inside, as if the air had been sucked out of me. "I know, I should have listened to you sooner." And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly scared, not because I was leaving, but because I was finally starting to live on my own. I took a deep breath, taking one last look around my childhood bedroom, the walls still covered with yellowed posters, the bookshelf with my school notebooks and photos of me smiling surrounded by my parents. As if believing the love between us was something eternal and unbreakable, I'd simply trusted them, because they were my parents, and until the very end, I'd held on to the conviction that Mom and Dad were people you could explain anything to, who would understand even if the whole world turned its back on you. but Melissa, standing in the doorway, only said quietly, frowning slightly, "They treated you like an ATM, Maria, not like a daughter. It's time to stop making excuses." I nodded, not trying to argue, because for the first time in a long time, I realized how true that was. We loaded everything into the cars, my old silver sedan and Melissa's SUV, suitcases, boxes, bags of clothes. It all seemed ridiculously small when you consider how many years I'd lived in this house. Before leaving, I walked through the rooms once more, the hallway, where photo stains lingered on the walls, the kitchen, which once smelled of pies but lately only of fatigue and irritation. I expected to be overwhelmed by a wave of nostalgia, to burst into tears, like in the movies, but no, instead, relief came, quiet but powerful, like an inhalation after holding your breath for so long. I placed the house key on the kitchen table, next to the salt shaker, and, without looking back, walked out the door. Melissa's apartment was cozy, a two-room apartment with green walls and a huge ginger cat named Oscar, who immediately occupied my suitcases, as if he thought they were new beds. Melissa had laid out a futon in the spare room beforehand, placed a lamp, and even a small bouquet of daisies on the windowsill. "So you'll feel right at home," she said. We ordered pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and settled on the balcony, where the breeze played with the curtains and the city glowed softly beneath us. I told her everything, from the very beginning, without holding back a single detail. How from my first job, almost my entire salary went to my parents, how my mother sighed when I bought myself a new lipstick, how I was made to look stupid in front of the whole family on my birthday, and how I saw those text messages, each one piercing my heart like a small knife. Melissa listened without interrupting, only occasionally shaking her head. When I finished, she asked quietly but firmly, "So what now? What's your plan?" I looked up at the night sky, where the light from an airplane flickered over the rooftops, and said, "Find a place to live. I have a little savings, 8,000, enough to pay the first and last month's rent and a deposit. That's a start." Melissa nodded, sipping her wine. "And your family?" I stared at the city lights for a long moment, then sighed, "I don't know. I guess they're just a thing now." Around 7, my phone started vibrating, one ring, then another, then another. I didn't pick it up. By 8, the screen was littered with notifications. "Mom, Maria, where are you? Your car is missing. Dad, call us immediately, we're worried." "Mom, some of your things are missing. What's going on?" "Dad, it's not funny. Maria, come home." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing one short message. "I know everything. I moved out. Don't text me anymore." Right after that, my phone went crazy. Messages poured in one after another. "Mom, what are you even talking about? Come home right now." "Dad, you can't just leave, we need to talk." "Mom, you're being incredibly selfish after everything we've done for you." I turned off my phone and went to bed, feeling not anger, but a strange calm, as if a quiet had finally come inside me after a long storm. The next morning, I turned it on and saw dozens of missed calls and messages, now not only from my parents, but also from Vanessa. Her words were, as always, caustic. "Damn it, Maria, you're breaking Mom's heart with this childish prank. Grow up and go home. This isn't about you. You don't know what Mom and Dad sacrificed for you." I read it out loud, and Melissa just chuckled. "Yes, you're the sacrifice." I blocked them all and, grabbing my bag, went to work, determined to drown my thoughts in work. At the office, I immersed myself in a new marketing campaign, like diving underwater where no one could reach me. My colleagues didn't notice, I was smiling and joking, and it wasn't until lunchtime, when I opened my laptop and saw a tab with real estate listings, that the reality of what was happening returned. After work, I met with a real estate agent, a woman named Linda, friendly and attentive. She showed me 3 apartments. The first turned out to be too far from the office, in an area where buses ran only once an hour. The second looked nice, but the bathroom fixtures were so ancient that I was afraid I'd one day simply run out of water. But the third, small but bright, with large windows and a view of the park, just 10 minutes from work, immediately captured my heart. It smelled of fresh paint and hope. The next few days flew by in a flurry. I signed papers, negotiated internet access, rummaged through thrift stores for furniture, downloaded discount apps, and gathered everything I needed. And every evening, returning to Melissa, I felt something new growing within me. Not anger, not fear, but a sense that I was finally escaping a life where I'd been caged and called love. By the weekend, I finally received the keys to my new apartment, a small set tied to a ring that jingled in my hand like the promise of a new life. I stood in the doorway, looking at the bare walls, the floor still smelling of fresh varnish, and couldn't believe that this place was now mine. For the first time in years, I felt the space around me free of other people's expectations and harsh gazes. Melissa, who had come to help me unpack, smiled as I carefully opened the box of dishes. "I'm so proud of you, Maria," she said, handing me a roll of kitchen paper. "This place is absolutely lovely, small, but cozy, and everything here is yours." I nodded, feeling the words penetrate deeper than I could have imagined. Yes, the apartment was tiny, with one bedroom, a small kitchen, and an old refrigerator that buzzed like a bee, but it was mine. Every fork, every plate, every receipt, everything was now in my name, and for the first time, no one could make me feel obligated. I was arranging books on the small shelf, carefully lining up the spines, when the phone rang. The screen read, "Aunt Linda." I froze, my chest tightened, as if someone had opened an old, unhealed wound. "Hello, Aunt Linda," I answered as calmly as I could. Her voice was soft but anxious. "Maria, dear, your mother asked me to call. She's a nervous wreck, she can't find peace." I gritted my teeth, feeling the familiar wave of irritation rise inside me. "I'm sure that's exactly it," I said evenly, trying not to let my voice waver. "Listen, whatever disagreements you have," she continued, "just talk to them, they love you, after all." I closed my eyes. "Aunt Linda," I said quietly, "did they tell you why I left?" There was a short pause on the other end. "They said there was some misunderstanding," she answered hesitantly, "and that you haven't been answering your phone or returning your messages. They're very worried." I sighed heavily. "It's not a misunderstanding," I said, feeling my voice grow firmer. "I found out they'd been taking my money all this time, all the money they said they needed to pay bills and the mortgage, they sent to Vanessa. And then they let everyone think I was just a loser who lived at home because she couldn't afford anything." A long, almost awkward silence fell on the line. All I could hear was her breathing. "I paid for everything," I continued, feeling the words finally spill out of me, without restraint: "the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, the insurance, even the car repairs, for years, Aunt Linda, and they were helping Vanessa with her apartment, her furniture, her vacation." A sigh, barely audible, came over the line. "Oh, my God, I had no idea. They made it sound like you were the one receiving their support." I smiled bitterly. "That's exactly what they wanted everyone to think." "Maria," her voice trembled, "I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry, especially after that birthday I laughed at Vanessa's toast. Oh, my God." I closed my eyes and shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "It's not your fault, Aunt Linda, you didn't know, no one knew." After we hung up, I stood by the window for a few minutes, watching the evening lights of the city twinkle below. My soul was strangely mingled. Sadness that the truth had finally been revealed, and a quiet satisfaction that at least someone now knew how things really were. A week passed, and I began to get used to a new rhythm, waking up to the sun, not to footsteps in the hallway, walking to work, making myself breakfast while listening to music, and returning in the evening to an apartment filled only with my own silence. I learned to enjoy the little things: the smell of coffee, the sound of rain on the windowsill, the way Oscar from Melissa's apartment would come to visit while she was at work. Everything was finally taking shape, something I could call my life. And then, midweek, my secretary called me on the intercom. "Maria, your family is here. They're waiting for you in the lobby." My heart sank. I took a deep breath, adjusted my skirt, trying to keep my hands from shaking, and headed for the elevator. In the lobby, at the reception desk, the three of them stood: Mom, tear-stained; Dad, sullen and stern; and Vanessa, arms folded and tapping her foot with an exasperated expression, as if the whole performance was a burden to her. When Mom saw me, she immediately stepped forward, looking as if she were about to throw herself at me. I raised my hand, stopping her. Several colleagues passing by slowed their steps, glancing in our direction with curiosity. The last thing I wanted was to turn family drama into office gossip. "There's a cafe across the street," I said calmly. "I'll meet you there in 5 minutes, just briefly." They exchanged glances and nodded reluctantly. I returned to my boss, excused myself, citing family matters, and, grabbing my coat, crossed the street. When I entered the cafe, they were already seated at a table by the window, Mom fiddling with her napkin, Dad leafing through the menu, as if trying to avoid conversation, and Vanessa, noticing me, leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed demonstratively. I approached, feeling a mixture of determination and fatigue. It was clear to me, this was about to be the conversation I'd been both waiting for and dreading. I sat down in the chair, back straight, feeling the chill of the cafe furniture cut through the thin fabric of my skirt, and tried to maintain a look of complete calm on my face, even though everything inside me was clenching with tension. "You have 15 minutes, I said, looking straight at them. "Then I have to get back to work." Mom looked up, her eyes reddened from tears, and said in a trembling voice, 15 minutes? After you disappeared for a week without a word? I nodded stiffly. I didn't disappear, Mom, I moved out, and considering what I learned, I think I was surprisingly restrained. She fiddled with her napkin, twisting it into a tight rope, as if trying to release her anxiety. "I don't know what you're talking about, Maria," she began, but I interrupted, feeling everything that had been penned up for weeks boiling inside me. "I read your correspondence with Vanessa, all the messages, about how you wired her my money, about how you laughed at me behind my back." The words were quiet, but they rang with metal. Vanessa paled, stopped tapping her foot, and stared into her coffee cup without looking up. Dad looked down at his hands, his shoulders tensing, as if expecting a blow. "Those messages were personal," Mom finally said, her voice almost pleading. I looked at her coldly. "Personal?" "That was my money, Mom, the money you said you needed for bills, for repairs, for medication, for everything you supposedly couldn't live without. But in reality, you gave it to Vanessa." I pointed at my sister, who was now pretending to examine her spoon, as if she could find salvation in it. "You don't understand," Dad interjected, his voice low and weary. "Vanessa has expenses too. We were just trying to help both our daughters." I looked up sharply. "So, I don't have any expenses?" I asked, feeling a hot lump rise in my throat. "I put my life on hold for you. For years, no vacations, no new things, no hanging out with friends. I saved every penny to help you get out of, as you said, debt. And all that time, she was buying new furniture, flying to Cancun, and all of it with my money. That's not help, Dad, that's betrayal." Vanessa finally raised her head, a hint of irritation flickering in her gaze. "We're family, Maria," she said, emphasizing every word. "We're supposed to help each other." I chuckled. "Help? You've never helped me in your life, but I helped you all while you laughed behind my back, like at my birthday party, when you called me a loser in front of everyone." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "It was a joke." I leaned a little closer. "The joke you all laughed at," I said quietly but firmly, and I stood there, with a stupid smile, feeling the last drop of dignity die inside me. Dad sighed deeply, rubbed his temples, and said, "Maria, we made mistakes, we're sorry, but we need you. Our mortgage payment is due next week, and we're short on money." I leaned back in my chair, and suddenly everything became crystal clear. "That's why you're here," I said calmly, "not because you missed me, not because you're worried about me. It's just that the payment is due, and your personal ATM is closed." Mom and Dad exchanged glances, their faces revealing more than their words. Mom extended her hand toward me, her fingers trembling. "We're your parents, Maria, we raised you, paid for your college." I pulled my hand back, "which I've already more than paid for over the last 4 years, Mom." "So what now?" Vanessa asked sharply, crossing her arms. "Are you going to completely cut us off?" I looked at her with a long, piercing gaze, devoid of any resentment or anger, only weariness. "I'm taking a break, Vanessa, from all of you. I need time to process all of this, to figure out if I even want to continue a relationship built on lies and exploitation." "But the bills," Dad began, but I held up my hand, stopping him. "The bills aren't my concern. I don't have to pay for your mistakes, pick up extra shifts, like I've been doing all this time. Maybe next time, don't send Vanessa money if you don't have enough." My sister flushed. "I have my own bills too." I smiled bitterly. "Welcome to adulthood, where you pay for everything yourself and don't live off your parents, or your sister." I looked at my watch. Exactly 15 minutes had passed. I stood up. "My time is up. I need to get back to work. Maria, please." Mom grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly, as if she could hold me back with the sheer force of her guilt. "We're family, we'll figure this out." I slowly removed her hand from mine, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "Family doesn't manipulate or exploit each other, "Mom, family doesn't lie, I need space right now, and I expect you to respect that." I turned and walked out of the cafe. The door clinked softly behind me, letting in the street noise and fresh air. I walked, feeling the weight that had accumulated over the years lift from my shoulders with every step, and for the first time in a long time, I truly could breathe easily. The following weeks were difficult, like after a long storm, when it seems the sky has finally cleared, but you can still hear thunder in the distance. My parents called from new numbers, changed their voices, begged, demanded, pleaded, and each time, I felt the old anxiety welling up inside me, that same fear of being a bad daughter, ungrateful, indifferent, selfish. Sometimes I caught myself almost reaching for the phone, but I stopped myself in time. They weren't calling to ask how I was. They were calling to regain control. When the blocked numbers stopped working, calls began from distant relatives and old family friends, flying monkeys, as my therapist once said, people who genuinely didn't understand that they were participating in manipulation. They told me how my parents were suffering, how my mother couldn't sleep at night, how my father looked old, how Vanessa cried because she missed her sister. All these speeches ended the same way: "They are your family, Maria, forgive them, because family is everything." I simply listened, remained silent, thanked them for their concern, and hung up. The only one who didn't try to change my mind was Aunt Linda. She came to visit me on Saturday morning, holding a small ficus plant and a box of homemade pie. We sat on my old sofa, the sunlight falling softly on her wrinkled face. "I told your mother what she did was wrong," she said quietly, looking around my tiny but cozy living room. "She and your father need to admit what they did and leave you alone until you're ready." I exhaled deeply. "Thank you, Aunt Linda, I really do. It means a lot. It's important to know that at least one member of the family understands." She squeezed my hand. "It's not your fault, Maria. Sometimes children have to be more mature than their parents." Over time, I began to hear about them from others, not directly, but casually, from acquaintances who still ran into my parents at church or local events. They said Dad was working full-time again despite his back pain, Mom had found a job at a department store on weekends, and Vanessa was angry because the financial aid had dried up. Sometimes a feeling of guilt stirred inside me, like the shadow of an old habit, but I reminded myself that this wasn't punishment, it was the consequence of their own decisions. Now they were finally living the way they would have lived in the first place, if they weren't watching my back and taking advantage of my salary. And for the first time in years, I was living my own life. My apartment became not just a home, but a refuge, a space where everything exuded peace. I joined a book club, which I'd long dreamed of joining, but had always been busy with housework before. On Wednesdays, we'd gather at Joanna's, laughing, arguing, discussing novels, drinking wine. In the evenings, I painted. I bought an easel and a box of acrylic paints and allowed myself not to be perfect, but simply to create. I started dating Ryan, a guy from the design department. He was quiet, attentive, with tired eyes and kind hands. With him, for the first time, I felt like I could be myself, without having to save someone, without having to earn love, without having to apologize for my successes. We walked through the park, ate ice cream on a bench, and talked about everything I'd never allowed myself to discuss before: dreams, fears, plans for the future. I even opened a retirement account, albeit a small amount, but this gesture meant a lot. I was finally thinking about my future, not someone else's. With each passing day, I felt a lighter feeling emerging within me, as if I'd finally shed an old skin. People around me knew me as Maria, the woman who loved coffee with cinnamon, joked with colleagues, helped at the animal shelter, and not as the eternal daughter living with her parents. I was no longer a reflection of other people's expectations. I became myself. 6 months passed. One evening, I was sitting at a restaurant with Melissa. We were celebrating her promotion. Over dessert, she suddenly asked, "Have you heard from your family?" I shrugged. "Mom sent a postcard for my 6-month move." Imagine, a postcard. She said she missed me and wanted to talk. Melissa put down her glass and asked, "So what do you think?" I considered it. "Maybe someday, on my terms, with clear boundaries." She smiled. "I'm proud of you, Marie, I really am." We clinked glasses. "To freedom," she said. "To freedom," I repeated, feeling the words ringing inside me like a mantra. Later that night, I stood on my balcony, wrapped in a sweater, looking out at the city lights. A cold wind brushed my face, but I felt warm. I thought about how, For the first time in years, I was saving for my future. How every decision I made was now mine alone. My apartment was far from luxurious, hand-me-down furniture, a smattering of paint on the walls, a cat bowl by the door, but it was all mine, earned and chosen out of love, and no one could make me feel guilty for living my life anymore. I remembered the words my therapist had said to me during our last session. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for toxic loved ones is to stop indulging them. I hadn't fully understood them then, but now I knew. Leaving wasn't revenge, but an act of self-love. Maybe one day I'd talk to my parents again, maybe not, but now I knew for sure. I would never again sacrifice my present and my future for those who didn't see my value. I hadn't just left, I had finally chosen myself.